I'd like to thank everyone today for coming to share information with our students for the Careers in Annapolis, Black in Annapolis state government event. The members of my organization, Black Students in Public Policy, have definitely been looking forward to this event since I actually spoke with Senator Smith about it almost, I want to say 4 months ago now, just because we're not used to seeing a lot of faces that look like us in Annapolis, and not just people that look like us as delegates, but also as chiefs of staff, legislative lawyers, people in the governor's office, and lobbyists as well. So I thank you again all for joining me today. Now, if all of you could just go and introduce yourselves, and so I'll call on the first person, and then if the person could popcorn to the next person, just to give a brief overview of what you do and how you got there. And I'll start off with Senator Smith.
Excellent. Hey, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. First, Josh, let me just say thank you for bringing us together. And I remember our conversation a couple months ago, and I'm just really glad this has all come to fruition. And also just say congratulations, man. I know you won the Richard Collins III Award, so well-deserved. Thank you for your service with the Army, even though I'm a Navy guy. You support the service. And I just want to say congratulations for that well-deserved award. That's a big deal, so congratulations. So my name is Will Smith. I'm a state senator from Montgomery County, first African-American to serve in the Maryland State Senate from Montgomery County. I'm also chairman of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, and the first African-American to serve in that position. The Judicial Proceedings Committee is the oldest of the 4 standing committees. Actually, it's the oldest committee in the General Assembly. There have been 50 chairs of that committee. And obviously the work that comes through, this committee has a disparate impact on Black and Brown communities. So it's all important to have people represented not only on the committee in elected office, but as committee counsel, as members of the staff, and then also in the lobby corps. So I'm really glad that you brought us together here for this discussion, and just want to say congratulations and thanks again. Looking forward to it.
And then after that, could we have Mr. Mitchell?
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name's Keefer Mitchell. It's great to be here. Thanks, Joshua, for putting this together. And it's good to see so many familiar faces on this panel. Again, my name's Keefer Mitchell. I'm the Chief Legislative Officer for Governor Hogan here in Annapolis. And essentially, my job is the governor's lobbyist as it relates to not just as the Maryland General Assembly trying to get his legislative agenda through, but also I oversee the governor's federal relations office in Washington, D.C., any type of federal priorities that the governors have, and also local government affairs that I also oversee. I've been with the governor since 2015 when he first came into office. I'm a registered Democrat, so I have a unique role in serving in a Republican administration as a Democrat. And so I've been doing that. Prior to that, I served in the Maryland House of Delegates for 4 years. And I served and prior to that, I served on the Baltimore City Council for 12 years. I have a family background that extends into politics. My uncle, Keefer Mitchell, was the first Black congressman for the state of Maryland, elected in 1971, one of the original members of the Congressional Black Caucus. I had another uncle who was in the legislature, served 24 years, one of the youngest elected to the legislature at the age of 22. His name was Clarence Mitchell, who was a House of Delegates in 1962. And then in the state Senate from 1967 to 1986. Another uncle who was in the city council and in the state Senate, Uncle Michael, and then my cousin Clarence Mitchell IV, who's known as C4, has a radio show on WBAL radio. He served in the legislature for 4 years in the House of Delegates and then in the state Senate for another 4 years. So I'm very familiar with the Annapolis world, and it is a very unique position, especially as an African American, knowing the history of African Americans in Annapolis. So I look forward to hearing questions and hearing what everyone has to say. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mitchell. And if we go now to Delegate Davis.
Good morning. My name is Delegate Debra Davis. I am from Charles County, Maryland. I serve on the House Judiciary Committee. I'm also the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus's Criminal Justice Committee. While this is my first session in the House, I served 8 years as a county commissioner from Charles County. I'm also a University of Maryland graduate and undergrad, and I went to UB Law. And I think that's it. Thanks. I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Delegate Davis. And then I do not want to get your name wrong, but Mrs. Sanchez, and then if you could pronounce your last name for me so I don't.
Ifekauche. I'll still just answer the Sanchez. I know it's a lot to pronounce.
Thank you so much.
But thank you. Good morning. I'm Delora Sanchez Ifekauche. I'm a principal at Cornerstone Government Affairs, which is a national lobbying firm with 12 offices across the United States, and of course, in DC, our flagship that does federal lobbying. So I've been working in Annapolis as a lobbyist for various clients for about 13 years now. Prior to opening Cornerstone Government Affairs, the Annapolis office in 2015 with 2 other professionals, we've grown to about 6 folks now, or actually 7. Prior to that, I represented Johns Hopkins doing their government affairs for about 8 years. And I went to the University of Maryland for law school and Towson University for undergrad. And thanks for inviting me to be here. And it's great to see everyone. Chairman Smith, Delegate Davis, who I lobby in Annapolis. And of course, Keefer Mitchell and Richard. Always great working with them also. So thank you very much for the invitation.
All right, thank you so much. And then next, if we could go to Mrs. Young.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Ny'esha Young. I'm Delegate Davis's Chief of Staff. My job kind of consists of advancing Delegate Davis's legislative agenda, keeping things like in order as far as like her schedule, my schedule, constituent services and things of that nature, staffing when it comes to interns and stuff like that. How I got in my current position in just last year in May 2020, I just graduated from Towson University. I was actually an intern at Senator Smith's office last year in the 2020 session. And then I was lucky enough for Delegate Davis to grab me out of a law firm where I was working to allow me to be her chief of staff this year. And I've been able to learn a lot, and I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you.
All right, and then lastly, but of course, certainly not least, Mr. Tabuteau, if you go next.
Tabuteau. But thank you for the invitation, Josh. And yeah, no problem. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Richard Tabuteau. I'm a lobbyist in Annapolis. I've had a very varied professional career. Out of law school, I practiced as a litigator, business litigation attorney for about 4 years. Then I transitioned to the Maryland Attorney General's office in their legislative affairs office. So essentially the lobbyist for the Office of the Attorney General. Then I joined Keiffer as one of the rare Democrats in a Republican administration, where I served as a senior advisor to Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford. And then from there, I joined a lobbying firm in Annapolis and worked there for about 3.5 years. And then over that period of time, built a pretty substantial or decent book of business and started my own practice in October of last year. So, half of my clients are legislative clients and half of my clients are procurement clients. So happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, and again, thank you so much for all of our panelists for giving us their time today. I have a few pre-prepared questions, but if any of our participants would like to ask a question, please put it in the chat and I will ask. And then if you would like to ask questions to a specific person, please put it in the chat and to who you'd like the question to, and I will ask it. So I'll just start off with saying that, of course, after the events of the last year, I think it was very important that Maryland act on issues, distinctly related to Black and Brown people, specifically passing a police reform package. And my first question is, as people of color that work in Annapolis, how did you bring your personal experience to this issue when trying to push it through legislatively? And first, I want to go to Delegate Davis.
Personal experience regarding police reform. Wow. We all have them, right? Mine's a little unique because I was a criminal justice major at Maryland. I grew up in Prince George's, which is notorious for its police community relationships. I also served on a police task force, police reform task force 30 years ago. So this was really personal to me, to be 30 years in this fight and to get to this point and to be in the leadership at that time. It was really personal to me. So I think that the question is on point because it has been a long fight. I don't believe it's over, but it has been a long fight and it's been a personal fight. I know I don't look like I could do this 30 years, but yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then to follow up with that, as a younger member of the Maryland Senate, Senator Smith, if you could kind of speak to how you've seen this issue progressing over your lifetime, and if you think being a younger member has helped you bring a new face to this issue and shine a new light on it.
Well, thanks for the question. It's interesting you say that. It's kind of timely. So not to get too personal, but yesterday I had my aunt, we had a funeral for my aunt. She passed away, and that was my one of the last two sisters from my dad's generation. They're born in the 1930s. And so I've been thinking a lot about, kind of what her relationship was like with my dad and what their relationship was like with Maryland. And they were both born in Cumberland, Maryland in the 30s, and then moved to Washington, D.C. and just some of the indignities that they would talk about and some of the experiences they had, and how there's just a huge gulf in terms of experience between kind of all the atrocities and indignities that they suffered through and kind of where the life that they were able to provide for me. And then kind of us going through this latest iteration of a racial reckoning in our country. For our generation, we kind of get a glimpse of what has been happening throughout our country's history. That combined with the fact that Maryland here, we play a central role in African-American history. Oxford, Maryland was a critical part of that Middle Passage from Senegal right here in Oxford, Maryland, and all the way down. The slave trade was vibrant here. People passed through here and went to the Carolinas, Louisiana, and even down to the island. So, and then all the way the through line, all the way to the Mitchells. So we've got a long, rich history of African-American achievement and struggle. So for me in the legislature, being one of the younger members, my experience in this issue with regard to legislation really started in 2015-16, right after the in custody death of Freddie Gray, and then the uprising and that conversation. And that's where we had our first bite over police reform, which we did a lot of good things, but obviously we didn't go nearly far enough, and we didn't meet the moment then. And so as a freshman delegate then, kind of learning those lessons about legislating and all the players and movements, unions, activists, communities that have struggled, all that coming together, obviously then informed a lot of our decision-making after the summer that we had last summer, and the new renewed conversation and appreciation and vigor behind this movement that informed our work at this past legislative session. So happy to go into more details, but I think I've been kicking around a lot of things between the funeral and Oxford, Maryland, and kind of just thinking about some of the reflections. So thank you for the question.
Well, first off, of course, I'm sorry for your loss, Senator. Now we have a question in the chat that I'm actually going to pose to Mr. Tabuteau, Ms. Sanchez, and Mr. Mitchell. How is it like working for an opposing party? And in addition to that, as lobbyists, specifically to Mr. Tabuteau and Ms. Sanchez, do you ever have to contribute to causes that you might not support? And if I could go to Mr. Tabuteau first.
Sure. So that was a very difficult question I had to resolve myself when I chose to join the Hogan administration. Just to give you some context, and I don't want to eat up too much time, but in 2014, we had a gubernatorial election, and I was very involved in the Democratic primary. My preferred candidate, who was also my boss, the sitting Attorney General, Doug Ganser, had lost the primary to then the sitting lieutenant governor. And despite the loss, I still wasn't convinced that that was the best nominee for the party. And I was intrigued by Larry Hogan, and he was saying a lot of moderate things that really didn't really turn me off. He kind of shied away or didn't address many socio-cultural type of issues that typically get Republicans in a lot of trouble and or frustrate people like me, and focus mostly on the economy and jobs. So I felt relatively comfortable joining the administration, and I was pleasantly surprised throughout my experience. I mean, there's the man, even to this day, in his 7th year in office, still carries a over 70% approval rating. So that kind of tells you that it was a moderate kind of experience in the administration. So I felt very comfortable. And on the question of issues, I really don't take clients or work with clients with issues that I have a meaningful disagreement with. And now that I have my own practice, I could definitely not have to do that. So one of the issues that maybe Senator Smith or Delegate Davis may remember is when we were trying to do bail reform. And there were bail bondsmen trying to hire a number of lobbyists in Annapolis to kind of maintain the status quo. That, I mean, they could have offered me, $100,000 a month. There's no way I would take that kind of client. So there are issues that rise to the level that you just don't feel comfortable taking them, no matter what they're offering you. And then there are some clients where you're kind of indifferent to the subject and you just kind of do the work as a lawyer.
Thank you so much. And then if we go to Ms. Sanchez as well.
Sure. I can't speak to going into an administration or working for a candidate. I've never gone into the machine, so to speak, but I have represented various clients. And one of the nice things or one of the things that made me want to go to the firm where I currently am is having the autonomy to say I am not comfortable with representing a certain issue or a certain client. Certainly sometimes there are issues where, and I think any lobbyists / lawyers have the experience where you have a client and they kind of tell you some information and then you don't kind of have the full picture, and then more information comes out. And, at that point, it becomes tougher because you already have an established client that you're working with. So you have to kind of really do your due diligence from the front end. But one of the nice things about being principal at a firm is that I can say I'm not comfortable with this particular client. And there have been clients that we have decided not to take, and we will refer them out to other firms and other very capable lobbyists in town that can take care of them. But that's just not, a client that we would be interested in representing.
All right, thank you so much. And then Mr. Mitchell, the same question.
Yeah, so I, like Richard, I had a very unique role here in Governor Hogan's office in terms of being an advisor and chief legislative officer. I have a record that people can pull up in my 4 years as a legislator, and also and 12 years as a member of the city council. And so I've always said I let my record speak for myself. But when it comes to giving advice to the governor, when the governor asked me to come on board, he was well aware that I was a Democrat. And when we had our conversations prior to coming on board, he wanted me to give some practical and good advice about the legislature and about legislative issues and those types of things. And one thing that I really admire about the governor is he allows you to have your say. So, you know, when we're discussing issues and things like that, you know, I have the ability to speak frankly, and when we're deciding on things, on what I feel is good, what I feel is bad. And sometimes the governor takes my advice, sometimes he doesn't take my advice. That's just the nature of the role of being an advisor in the executive branch. The other piece is I look at it, I sort of remind folks, it's almost like in coaching, if you're familiar with coaching, there's a head coach and then there's assistant coaches. I would look at it as I'm an assistant coach. So I'd say, you know, go out and here's a play we should run, Coach Hogan, this is a play we should run. And he said, well, I don't think we should run that play. We ought to go this play. You give them the best advice that you can at the time as you see it. And then at the end of the day, it's the governor whose name is on the ballot. It's the governor who's out there that's going to be accountable to the citizens of Maryland, and he makes that decision. But he does listen. He doesn't like blow off any advice or he invites sort of like dissension. He wants to hear all sides of an issue. And one thing I do admire about the governor is once he makes his decision, he moves forward. There's no wishy-washy, there's no flip-flopping or anything like that. He makes that decision. So my role is very unique in that, particularly this legislative session. You know, I come from a civil rights family and had members, you know, within my family and myself have police encounters and this whole police reform issue. The governor vetoed a couple of bills on that. And as chief legislative officer, it was my job to help craft those veto messages. And so, but that's the role that I signed up for and do. Does it, you know, reflect on my convictions or anything like that? You know, I don't think so. But, you know, my job is to advise the governor, and the governor, when he makes a decision, is very sound in his decision and sticks with it. So going back to relationships, you know, as a Democrat, you know, I think Annapolis is all about relationships. I think Delora and Richard and Will and Debra can all attest that, you know, you can disagree on policy and have arguments in committee, but at the end of the day, it's about relationships. And I've felt very comfortable since I've been in the Hogan administration that I can pick up the phone and call Senator Smith or Senator Dave or Delegate Davis and talk about issues, and they feel free that they can reach out to me. So at first it was a struggle. It was sort of different, but at the end of the day, like I said, it's all about relationships in Annapolis and working together. It's not as acrimonious as people like to see that you see on social media all the time, Democrats versus Republicans. You know, we at the end of at the 90 days, we're still staying in touch and communicating on issues and things like that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mitchell. And then so my next question is for Mrs. Young. As someone that previously interned in Annapolis and is now working as a chief of staff, how did you kind of make your decision from interning in Annapolis to start working here locally in Maryland, rather than working either in DC or in, you know, a law firm, as you said? What was the convincing factor to bring you to Annapolis? And how did your personal experience help your decision?
Thank you for the question. So I actually had a unique experience when I was in college. I was able to intern in DC for federal lobbyists. So I kind of had an idea how DC was. And just as my opinion, I've never been a big fan of DC politics. I think it takes a little bit too long. I like how Annapolis politics are a little bit more faster, listen to the constituents a little bit more to me. And you have those 90 days, those 90 days a lot gets done. So the Maryland over DC was always an easy decision for me to personally make. And then as far as why I decided to stay in Annapolis, so working with Senator Smith, his first year as a chairman, It was a lot of fun. We were really close staff and I learned a lot. I was like one of the type of nerds who would like sit in the hearing room and just like do my work, just listening to hearings. And I really like just fell in love with the issues. So when the pandemic happened last year, I always wanted to stay in Annapolis. And this goes back to what Mr. Mitchell said about relationships. I stayed in touch with Senator Smith's staff and I told them like, hey, I'm working for this law firm, but like, I really want to work in Annapolis. Like I wanted to be in Annapolis. And his chief of staff is actually the one who told me about Delegate Davis's opening. So it goes back to those relationships. Like if I had just said like, pandemic happened, I'm over it, I'm gonna work for this law firm and I'm done, then I would have never had this opportunity. But instead I stayed in touch, became Facebook friends, all those like cool things that you do outside of work. And so that's kind of how I ended up as like the chief of staff. And as far as like my personal experience, I am well aware that like I'm a recent college grad, so I don't know a whole lot, but what I do know is like I have some that, like I said, younger thought process. I can kind of think about things a little bit different. Like I always think back to like, I remember Delegate Davis came out of hearing one day and she was like, this bill is an absolute no. And I'm like, no. I think it should be a yes. And just me like saying like, I don't agree with you, but like the reason why, because from my age, like my experiences, this is why I don't agree. She ended up like coming back to me like a month later and was like, I voted on that bill because of what you said. So I kind of just use like my youth and like a good sense of like, I'm brand new to this. So I have like brand new eyes and I kind of see things without having to been like biased from like previous years of experience that maybe would have like shaped my like thought process on certain bills.
All right, thank you so much for your answer. And so we have another question in the chat that I'm going to reframe in a bit. So the question initially was, can you talk about what good community policing looks like, and what are some preferred ways in which we can hope to police and engage with our communities? So I'd like to reframe the question a bit and ask, as a Black person in Annapolis, do you feel more expected to have the right answer on what good community policing looks like? And how do you work with experts to kind of balance and find a middle ground to pass meaningful legislation and get it over the board? And as we've seen in the last year, get it over with a 2/3 majority. And I actually want to direct this question first to the lobbyists on the call. How did you see the lobbying on both sides of this issue? And do you think that Black people in Annapolis felt pressure to do something this year in particular? Mr. Tabuteau, we go to you first.
I think I'm going to have to punt on this one simply because I didn't lobby the issue at all. Most of my lobbying clients are kind of corporate clients, and I didn't have any in that arena. So truthfully, I'm probably not the best to opine on that. But I would speak to your point generally that there's always pressure as a Black person anywhere that you have to speak or have the solution for certain issues that sometimes you may not be equipped to handle based on your knowledge, but perhaps Delora and presumably Delegate Davis would have.
Can I take a quick stab at that, Josh, real quick, just overall, and I'm going to let Delora and Delegate Davis take the specific question. But what I've learned in my years in Annapolis and looking at the history of Annapolis, particularly as an African American, there's a tendency here in Annapolis to pigeonhole African American senators and delegates into being just focusing on Black issues, Black or brown issues, civil rights issues. And the lesson that if any of you take anything from this, is that don't let folks do that to you. Don't allow them to do that. When you come to Annapolis, whether you lobby, whether you're in the policy of the Department of Legislative Service, or whether you are the chair of a committee or a delegate or senator, you find your own niche. Everybody can see that you're African American or you're brown or Latino. And so don't let folks make assumptions about you, but go out and become experts. You've got African Americans who are chair of committees, and I look at Delegate Debra Davis, who's the chair of Economic Matters. He's African American, been there for a while. He was in line for the speakership, but he's an expert on energy policy and all the financial issues that come of banks and financial regulation that comes through his committee. You've got Senator Smith. He says the youngest chair of the oldest committee in the 400 some plus years of the Maryland General Assembly. He's just not a person just as on police reform or those types of things, but He handles issues dealing with civil law and all the other things. So, you know, there's this tendency in Annapolis, from what I see, to try to, you know, pigeonhole Black folks into being, you're the expert on civil rights, so you're our go-to person. Don't worry about big issues, so-called big issues that deals with corporations and things like that. That's one of the things that I always try to caution folks about. So I didn't mean to take it up, but I'll let Delegate Davis and Delora take up the question.
Sure, if we go to Delora next.
Unfortunately, I did not represent anyone in the police reform space, but to the question of, you know, no matter what work you're doing, at least in my experience, I show up first as, you know, as a Black woman in America, and I deal with all of the things that come with that daily, at work, at home, you know, socially. That is just, you know, the world that we kind of live in. But I think certainly in my experience, there are issues that personally are, because they directly affect my community. It's whether it's like about women and or if it's about the Black community. I think it's something that I can't speak for anyone else, but I can't help but have personal feelings and emotions about it, whether I'm working an issue or not. I will say it was difficult listening to some of the floor debate this year. I mean, every year, right? There are issues that come up and I go, oh, this has been a taxing day to listen to the floor debate. And this year was no different. And it was even more heightened with emotion because of what we're seeing every day in news and media, and the focus that has now come upon some of these issues, because these issues are very old issues, old as this country, but we're seeing a lot of focus on it, right? So when you turn on the news, it's omnipresent. So I think that's a very long way to get to the point of saying, you know, while I wasn't personally working on the issues, I certainly was wrapped and listening to the debate and trying to figure out how things were going to go, because just personally having a stake in what the outcome might be. So, you know, I certainly do pay attention to other issues, even if it's not something that I'm working on for a client, just because of personal interest and my personal experience.
All right, and then if we could go next to Delegate Davis.
Josh, what was the question again? I mean, Delora, I really agree with how intense it was, but I'm trying to get back to what the question was again.
Sure. So the question is, do you, as a Black member of the Maryland House of Delegates, ever feel pressure to have the correct solution and have the answers for what good community policing reform looks like? And what are some of the preferred ways we can hope that the police engage in our communities?
So I mentioned that I agree with Delora. You know, when I walk into a room, I am who I am, right? I mean, this is America. You know, I'm seen as a Black woman. All too often, I'm touted as the person who's supposed to speak for all of Black America, and that can be a very heavy weight. I remember one of my colleagues in the middle of a hearing saying, well, Delegate Davis, you always look at everything through a racial perspective. And it was meant as a jab, but somebody has to do it. So I'll take it. Somebody has to do it. I'm not used to being in rooms where there is discussion and my voice is being muted. I'm not going to take that. I've been in this fight too long to have my voice be muted. And it was really tough this year. It was really tough to sit there through the debate when no one mentions that people were dying. No one mentioned that there's a problem. no one, it was really, really tough. And I got to work on it over the summer with other lawyers. I got to work on the speakers work group, and then in subcommittee, and then in committee, and then on the floor. It has been really, really tough. There's so much more work to do, but yeah. And I feel responsible. I do feel as though the weight was on my shoulder because of my history, because of where I've been and where I came from, and I've been working on this for so long. I did feel personal responsibility.
Thank you so much, Senator Smith.
Hey, thanks, Josh. I'll be quick. I just want to chime in as well, because the answer is yes, but I think it comes down to two words, which is responsibility and representation. So yes, we have a responsibility. You're here. Your constituents put you in this position for a reason. And when you go back to the voters and you put yourself before that, you make those arguments, and they put you there because you're expected to uphold a certain standard and push for a certain brand of policy. So yes, there's a responsibility, but it also ties back to what you and I have talked about and what Ny'esha and I have talked about, which is representation. And that means in all levels, right? Because when I look in our committee, and I love our committee council, and I love DLS, but it is not as diverse as it could or should be. And those, especially in JPR, right? So like I said, we have fantastic council. I don't want this getting out. Like I love them, and I'm happy to work with them, and they do fantastic work. But what I've been thinking about, and Ny'esha, we've talked about this on whiteboarding ideas, how to get folks together and figure out how we can get a pipeline of folks in DLS, how folks can, like you, can stay involved in Annapolis. We lost you to Venable, Ny'esha, then you went to Delegate Davis's, office. But here, the fact was that there was a pipeline there. And now your identity, your ideas, your energy is now influencing policy at a different level. And so, and that spirals out to the lobby corps. You have people from the lobby corps advocating from outside in. You got people elected, you got people working as counsel. It just helps the policymaking process. But what I've been keenly focused on is how do we get more folks of color involved at all levels? And I think that has a direct impact on policy. So yes, we need the representation there, and yes, we do have the responsibility to represent, our points of view as Black folks. So yes, I mean, it's responsibility and representation.
Thank you so much, Senator Smith. Now, I know we have a few questions in the chat, but I want to continue on this overarching methods of getting more involved in Annapolis. And so, Mr. Mitchell, as someone that has, a direct history in Annapolis and in Maryland state government, could you speak to some of the ways you've seen Annapolis change over time and how you see it changing in the future with regards to having more faces that look like us?
That's a great question. I'm looking at it on a Zoom call. I'm looking at the number of African-American lobbyists that are principals or running their own firms expand and grow. I look back at my Uncle Clarence, who was a state senator, but I also look back at Howard Pete Rawlings, who was the chair of the Appropriations Committee in the House of Delegates. If you were a white lobbyist that would come into his office to try to lobby on an issue, he would ask, where's the African-American lobbyists? How come you don't have an African-American lobbyist working on it? And they would stammer and things like that about, well, we can't find him. He goes, well, don't come with me until you find him. It was folks like that that paved the way for African-Americans in the lobbying field to get through. I look at my uncle, who was the founder of one of the founders of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators when he was in the legislature, and going around the country and increasing the number of African Americans who are elected, not just in the House of Delegates, but in the Senate, but also making sure that African Americans had meaningful roles in leadership positions. You look at the number of committee chairs, not just subcommittee chairs. I'm talking about chairs of committees that are making significant policy changes in our state, whose fingerprints are all on everything from the budget to how we conduct policing and how we conduct, our civil laws and things like that. There's a lot of changes. When my uncle came down in Annapolis in 1962, believe it or not, you could not eat in a restaurant on Main Street. You could not stay in a hotel in Annapolis if you were an African American. And now you look at what is going on in Annapolis in terms of the social interaction of African American legislators and lobbyists and policymakers coming in. That those are huge changes. And as Senator Smith said, we got to continue to grow the pipeline, particularly in Department of Legislative Services. So those are the folks that are committee counsel and staff to the committees. And they're the policy experts. I still rely on them in my role here in the governor's office, picking up the phone and calling DLS to say, okay, I read your fiscal note, but what about this issue? Or where'd you get this data? Those types of things. So, there've been some great changes in terms of expanding the pool of African Americans and all, but, as I've always said, we can always do better. We got a Black speaker. The House of Delegates. And I'm sure there are many folks who are a little older than me thought they would never see that, but that was a dream to see that type of leadership position taking place. So that's just what I have to say about the changes. I'm kind of old. I'm 53, so I feel old and things like that. So that's all I have to say.
And then I'll pose the same question to you, Ms. Sanchez and Mr. Tabuteau. On the other side, on the lobbying side, how have you seen, changes in people working on issues on a lobbying side? And as he just, gave a story about a lobbyist going to, a representative's office, how do you think we can improve on that? And kind of what are the ways you are looking to kind of recruit and bring more people on board to your firms?
Sure. Well, when I started down in Annapolis, there were not very many Black lobbyists. And I'm sure when some of the folks that I think of as some of the Black contract lobbyists that are essentially trailblazers, like Lisa Harris Jones and Frank Boston. I'm sure they were the two, before I kind of came along, but and so many other folks. I don't want to leave anybody out from I'd say about 20 years ago. But the lobbying corps should really be reflective of the legislature, or the folks that they are lobbying. And as diverse legislatures go, Maryland and I think Mississippi vacillate between the two largest Black caucuses in the nation. We really have a really great representation in the state of Maryland as those things go. Certainly there's always room for improvement, but we're really leaders in the nation for having representation of Blacks in the legislature. And then of course we have the Latino caucus, and we have Asian Pacific Islander caucus as well, that are very active in the legislature. So I think, really what makes the difference is our folks that, and Keiffer mentioned this, where you have legislators of color making sure that the people that are there to represent clients and that are there to lobby them are reflective of the legislature. And I think clients, won't really pay. If I'm looking to influence the legislature, I'm looking for someone to represent me, I'm not going to give any real consideration for what that person represents or looks like, unless and until those who hold the power make that known, that it is a priority for them to see that reflected back to them. So there are folks who are still in the legislature who really work hard in making sure that it is reflective. And Chairman Davis comes to mind. He's always been a great mentor, and just making sure that there are that he makes his concerns known about the lobbying corps in particular. And I'm sure there are others as well. I think the Black Caucus in particular in the last couple of years has done a tremendous job in looking at staffing and making it known that there needs to be a more representative kind of pool of folks coming in. In regards to the firm and the hiring practices that we have, I think what we've been doing is certainly looking at all of the folks, like when we have making sure we have a pipeline. It is nothing more frustrating to me than to know I have an opening or a friend of mine has an opening somewhere and I have no name of a Black person of color, Asian person, or a veteran or a woman to recommend. That should not be. And so try to make sure that there's a pipeline, right? So when we see folks like Ny'esha coming up through the ranks that's having that experience that has been steeped in going to work for Chairman Smith, going to work for Delegate Davis, we're looking at those folks to say, you know, if there's an internship available, if there's a entry-level associate position available, those are the folks that we're looking to. And in particular, in this field, you don't see positions posted. If something's posted, it's usually because it has to be posted, but most private firms, the discussions about who's going to be considered for that position starts weeks or months before, and they're already looking at the individuals that they think would be a good fit. And that's why it's important to have folks that can make those hiring decisions, that can consider having young people coming up through the pipeline and say, I want to take a look at this young lady, or I want to take a look at this young man. I think he would be good. Every time I step into this person's office, they're very knowledgeable. They get back to me. You know, that's how we kind of look at folks. So I couldn't say that we really post a lot of things, but we do certainly keep a list of who can we look at, women, young ladies, and people of color and Black people, to see, you know, who would be qualified for various positions, and then we have a conversation.
Thank you so much. Mr. Tabuteau, if you could answer the same question.
Sure. So similar to what Delora said, when I first started observing Annapolis was probably around 2011, 2012. And with the exception of Lisa Harris-Jones and Frank Boston, who, you know, they own their own practice. And so they had clients in various sectors that they represented. I did notice that among the other, not among the other, but there were instances, generally speaking, just generally speaking, where I saw Black lobbyists in Annapolis who, you know, maybe just turned out that way, but they worked on the, you know, the Black issues, the civil rights issues, the education issues. They were never in economic matters, or rarely in economic matters or Senate finance. Or when they were lobbying an issue, they were assigned to speak to the Black legislators, but, you know, their colleagues at the firm were really speaking to the you know, white members of the leadership of Annapolis. And that frustrated me in observing that back then, which is not that long ago. But I would say that has evolved tremendously over the last several years. You know, if Lisa's a trailblazer, I would put Delora in that next group of people that are well sought out, well respected, can speak to anyone, you know, Republican, Democrat, leadership, not in leadership. And that's what I like to see. That's the evolution you want to see in Annapolis. And I think that's happening, but that's definitely not where it was when I first started kind of observing who was doing what. On developing the next wave of talent, you know, I just started my firm in October. So, you know, I'm just trying to, you know, pay my mortgage and my son's tuition at this point. But I would say I'm very open to mentoring people, and I don't know if people get if it comes through through this webinar, but I am intensely pragmatic about what it takes to succeed, so I hold myself out to whoever wants to chat, get coffee or whatever, and just tell them, you know, what it takes, because like Delora said, these jobs, they're hard to come by, even if you weren't a minority person. It's just even more difficult to get the job, but it's very, very difficult. And there are things that you can do to position yourself well. And it just can't be you're smart or you're a nice person. You know, it just doesn't work that way. So happy to work with anyone that really kind of wants to figure out how to maneuver and how to get to wherever they want to go in Annapolis.
Thank you so much. And then while I'm not currently working in Annapolis, I think it's important to be said that a big part of people like us getting these jobs is you have to create your own opportunities. So I think it's super important that you know, students on this call and whoever's watching this in the future, you know, create their own opportunity. And whether that's sending a cold email to, you know, all of these people saying, hey, I'd like to meet with you, talk about, you know, what you're working on this upcoming session, you know, like I spent the past year doing, or just paying attention and offering testimony on bills and getting your name out there to people that matter. And so we have another question in the chat. Joshua John asked, there's so much work to do and so much change to make with so little time, and it feels overwhelming. How do you de-stress from the issues that you see in your communities? And I know we're coming up on time, so, and I know it's kind of a long question, but if you could give an answer in about 30 seconds or less, and I'll start off with Senator Smith. So how do you de-stress from the issues that you're working on?
How do I de-stress? Spend time with my family. You don't get a chance to do that during the 90-day session. So that's probably the biggest thing. Make sure you spend that quality time, because that also informs why you're doing what you're doing in the first place. So that's the number one thing. But I would say, look, like this past legislative session, 90 days is a short stretch. And I've always said that time is the most valuable commodity in a legislative session. So, you know, try not to waste any time this year. Historic police reform, the Juvenile Restoration Act, governor out of parole, right to counsel. I mean, a lot of things we did, a lot of things left undone, but I think it's also important to reflect on some of the victories that you've had during the session as well.
Thank you so much. And Delegate Davis?
Yeah, I think just recognizing that it is stressful is the first thing. And I think how you de-stress is really personal. I just got back from the mountains in Tennessee, so I'm feeling good right now.
Ms. Young?
I try to log out on weekends. I'm a firm believer that if you can, like, you shouldn't, like, try to check your email like all weekend long if you can avoid it. And then also lean on like your friends, especially in Annapolis, it's so easy to make friends. Like, lean on those friends who are going through the same thing as you and kind of help you get through those like tough 90 days.
Mr. Mitchell? You're muted there.
I'm sorry, I would say a nice glass of bourbon each day during a legislative session, but I digress. No, seriously, I think, you know, you realize, you know, in Annapolis, you're in this bubble, and everything is urgent. Everything is, it's a pressure cooker. But if you just go like a couple of blocks over, or you just go home, you realize, you know, you're not in the bubble. So it's important to stay close to family, kids, and realize what are the important things. Another question dealt with, you know, with all the issues going on with the communities. You know, I have a habit now of just turning off the news. I can't watch cable news channels anymore because it's just so much. And so I try not to watch the news. I get my news like very quickly, look at the AP website, just get what, all right, this is what's happening in the world and all that. This needs to be worked on. And then just, all right, I got my news and I can at least function for the day in terms of this is what's happening. But, you know, the main thing is just staying grounded and realizing what's important in your life. And that's your family and your friends and things that make you happy in terms of hobbies and exercise and those types of things.
Ms. Sanchez?
Yeah, the news, it's tough because we work, information is currency in the work that we do. And I struggle with turning off the news, but it is such a breath of fresh air when you do. I utilize the options on my iPhone stringently, meaning notifications go off. Like I turn off these mail notifications when, I mean, you have to, when you're working from home. I learned that in the last year. When you're working from home and you're not in session, I'm loath to do it during session, but when you're not in session, when it's time to not be at work, don't be at work, right? It's like, because if your notifications are on and you see that email, chances are it can wait until the next morning. If not, someone will call you. So, you know, just turning off those notifications on the weekends and in the evenings and spending time with your loved ones, I mean, and being present is very important. And then after session, just getting away. If it's not I like to go to the mountains too, Delegate Davis. If it's not a hike in the mountains, then I'm on someone's beach someplace. So it's good to have that time to decompress, and really being intentional about turning off and being diligent and disciplined. And you have to be, at least for me, because I might see an email and I say, oh, I'll just respond really quickly. And then it turns into, let's have a quick call, let's have a Zoom. And I'm no. So that's important.
And then just really quickly before I go to Mr. Tabuteau, if any of our panelists have a hard out at 12:30, you know, we thank you for your time. And if you would like to, you know, say a closing thing before Mr. Tabuteau goes, if any of our panelists are available to stay, we welcome that as well.
Hey, I apologize. I do have to go, and I really appreciate this. Joshua has my email, and feel free to reach out if anybody wants to touch base and talk on the phone, further discuss things. But I hope to see everyone here in Annapolis when we're not on Zoom or anything like that. But you've got an all-star panel up here. And I'm sorry that I had to disgrace the panel by my presence up here, but Joshua, you put together a really fine group of folks up here who have a lot of knowledge, and I hope all the attendees take advantage of making those relationships. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much as well. All right, and then lastly, Mr. Tabuteau. So how do you get away and de-stress?
A lot of what everyone said. I have a little boy, he's 7 years old, so I spend an enormous amount of time with him because I want to, but because, you know, he's a Black boy growing up in you know, America with all that comes with it, and pressures on him, stereotypes of where he might come from, and just, you know, trying to be a solid figure in his life. So it can be stressful dealing with him, but it's also very enjoyable. And I think that's the most important thing to me. And just generally speaking from a professional standpoint, if anyone was interested in being a lobbyist, it's a pretty good quality of life in Maryland, because you got to remember, we do have a part-time legislature. So for 90 days, it's terrible. But the rest of the days of the year, it's quite nice. You know, you have a normal, or you generally speaking should have a pretty good work-life balance. So.
All right, thank you so much. And again, if anyone is available to stay on, we're gonna keep going for till about 12:45. Just really quick, if anyone has any questions, any of our participants for our panel, please throw them in the chat. If not, my last question to everyone is, what is one issue that motivates you to come to work every January? And, you know, how do you think that, you know, you can accomplish that issue and bring your experience to that issue? And I'll go to Senator Smith first.
That's a really good question. I would, so a lot of the issues, generally like employment, civil rights issues, more on the civil side of the house, not the criminal, but access to justice issues are really important to me. I practice law in the civil context at a law firm in DC, based in DC and New York. And a lot of what we do is employment discrimination. And so a lot of the personal bills that I put forward deal with sexual harassment and discrimination based on disability or race or any other protected class. And so being in judicial proceedings, that affords you a really unique opportunity to make some of those changes in Maryland. So a lot of the stuff that I put forward this year came from cases that I had in other states. And so it's just like some of the improvements that other states have made, protections that other states have afforded their workers and their citizens that we haven't done yet. So I think that informs me and brings me to Annapolis every January on a personal level. So that's kind of like the civil rights in the civil context is probably what I get really jazzed about personally. But on a broader context, it's really just, this is a really, really unique and amazing opportunity to serve in this capacity. And it's a real honor to do that. And it's something that you have the ability to pull a few levers and to make a few phone calls and to help people out that need help. And there are very few jobs like that. And so if you don't get jacked to come to work because of that, everything you do is in furtherance of helping someone else out, then I don't know, what you're on. So I think that's the number one thing that does it. And in the context, I got to go. I actually have an 11:45, so just do a little quick closing real quick. I just say in this context, I just want to say, Josh, thanks and for bringing us together, because not only I talked about representation and responsibility, but also with that responsibility comes excellence. And it's not only about, everyone on this panel, I guarantee you had a panel that said you had to be twice as good or you had to work twice as hard or this and the other. So I know my mom and my dad told me that. And that's also about building each other up. Because in my time in Annapolis, one thing I've learned is you're only as successful as other people allow you to be. I mean, you've got to be prepared, you got to be hardworking, you've got to show up on time, all that good stuff, but you need other people to help you out if you're going to get things through a legislature, and supporting each other publicly and in private. So if you see someone messing up, you pull them aside privately and say, look, you need to tighten up here on this and let me help you out. But one thing I think that we fall to prey of is that, you get this crabs in a barrel mentality. We need to build each other up and support folks with resources and positive energy. And so that pipeline is part of it. Professional support is part of it. And things like this type of a conversation is important for us to get together and talk to each other. So I just really appreciate you bringing us together, Josh, and I'll give you a holler afterwards. But for the folks, the panelists, please hit me up on email, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm always around and really accessible. So I would look forward to a conversation with anyone that's listening. And I look forward to seeing you all around town and around the state in the weeks and months to come. So thank you all for having us. And thanks, Josh. Good to see you all as well. Delegate Davis, I'm gonna give you a holler, all right? All right.
Thank you so much. And then, so in closing, yes, if you could speak to one issue that motivates you, and we'll go to Ms. Sanchez next.
Sure, I just had to get off mute. I think every year I pick an issue that I do pro bono just because I think it's an important issue that needs to be addressed. And it always deals with things that affect the Black community. In 2020, it was the Crown Act. Actually, Senator Smith was our Senate sponsor. And so that was for people who might be listening, I don't know, that's to end hair discrimination in the workplace for ethnic hair. And so, so that's just one example. And then I think one year I did removing the copay for prostate cancer screening for men, which is something that affects men of color disproportionately. And then when they usually catch it, they're much older. And it winds up being fatal. They don't live very long. So just issues like that. I look for an issue probably in the fall before session starts, and work on. And both of those bills passed, by the way, in one session. But I look for an issue and then seek out sponsors and see about getting that legislation passed, because I think aside from all of the hard work that I'm doing for clients, and work that I'm happy to have, by the way. But all of the hard work I'm doing for clients, it's important to just take on issues that I may not have a client for, but I know will directly benefit the community that I'm from. And that's important to me. I have a set of skills that are not always readily found or utilized. And a lot of times some of these issues are not well represented or advocated for. Because lobbying is in many ways not very cheap. So it's important to me to pick an issue to do pro bono during session every year. So I usually do one issue.
Thank you so much. And then Delegate Davis, we go to you. One issue that motivates you and anything you would like to say also in closing.
Thank you. I am just honored to be in the room, to be the voice of people that aren't there. That's really important to me. And I take it really seriously. But if there was one issue, I think it would be this whole notion of the criminalization of poverty, right? The excessive fees that we're dealing with. Every year we make new laws with excessive fees, driver's licenses, losing your driver's license because you can't pay debt, going to jail because you can't pay debt. There was one bill just passed this year that you can't be jailed for district court debt. That's a new one. So I'm really excited about that. So if there was one thing, it would be that. I think as a first generation college student, I know about laws that stand in the way or things that can set a whole family back because somebody gets a speeding ticket or because somebody, just stuff like that. So that would be the one thing I'd be really, I'm really passionate about.
Thank you so much. And then Mr. Tabuteau.
Sure. One thing that gets me kind of passionate at the beginning of the new legislative session is I have a client that is particularly difficult, where an enormous set of stakeholders are in opposition to their very existence. And it consumes all of my time, my talents, strategy to try to win. And I have for the last 3 years, but it's a very motivating factor because that's really kind of where you prove your skill set, with a lot of luck, by the way. It's not just me, but that definitely gets me motivated. Just knowing that if I fail, my client will be out millions of dollars and I will be one less of a client, and just the sheer difficulty that comes with representing them. But one thing so that's the substantive stuff. But the one thing I really do like, and that does get me motivated from a positive standpoint or kind of refreshes me, is being able to deepen my relationships with people. I mean, that's really the entire business of being a lobbyist, not the entire, but a lot of it is deepening and fostering new relationships. And you can kind of do that during the interim, but you can do a lot more of it during 90 days when everyone is in Annapolis on site. And that's something I actually really enjoy. And since we're giving closing remarks, I just want to thank you, Joshua, for inviting me. Great panel, great questions. Happy to help any students out there that are thinking about going into this profession, whether it's being a lobbyist or just working on staff. I've done them both. I've worked on campaigns. I've worked in the executive administration too. So happy to impart anything I can to help you guys.
Thank you so much. And then lastly, Ms. Young, and then I'll say a few words to close us out.
I think I don't really have an issue, honestly, that gets me going every single day when I went to Annapolis. I think the biggest thing for me is I just wanted to learn. Just to be honest, I just walked in every single day, just wanted to learn more. I'm young. I don't know a lot of things, but I like to learn as much as possible. Everyone said this year, we did police reform. We've been asking for criminal justice reform. Police are only one part of the criminal justice system. So for me, I'm like, so what are the other forms that we can be doing? So things like that is kind of what gets me going, just to be able to walk in every single day. I'd be that kid that's staying up till 12 a.m. knowing I have to get up the next morning, just watching hearings, because I just want to learn and just hear the witnesses and the questions and things like that. So that's what gets me going every single day. I just like to be a nerd about policy, basically. It's what got me to Annapolis every single morning. And I think what I'd say in closing is that it's like being a dead horse, but as everyone has said previously, relationships, all these amazing panelists that were on here today. For anybody who's listening, I would definitely reach out to them. As I said, I got my position purely through relationships. I got my internship with Senator Smith purely through a relationship. I didn't even apply. I literally spoke to my professor who was a senator who texted his chief of staff. And I got my position with Delegate Davis purely through his chief of staff texting me saying, hey, it's a position open. So again, as Ms. Sanchez said, most positions are not posted online. You kind of have to just know people. So I would definitely use this opportunity very well to get to know all these amazing panelists that are on this, that was here today. If you're somebody who's my age, is about to graduate soon, who wants to get into Annapolis.
I need to interrupt 1 second.
So,
Ny'esha, you did not mention that you're leaving to go to law school and she's looking for a replacement right now. And you guys should know that.
Oh, yes. If I am going to law school next year. If anyone's interested, of course, just email our office. Sooner than later, positions, as quickly as they open, they close just as quickly. So if you're someone who's graduating this year, who's a senior, feel free to email us and I will let you know how to apply.
Well, thank you so much for that. And for anyone that is a little confused, Ms. Young is Delegate Davis's Chief of Staff. So that is the position that she's referring to. So again, I just want to say thank you so much for all of our panelists for giving your time. I know we went over a little bit, but I didn't want to cut everyone off and stop the conversation. I hope that we're going to actually work with our career office and send out your contact information, if that's all right, to the participants of this call. To anyone watching this in the future, please still feel free to reach out to our panelists for mentorship, for advice. You never know how far sending a cold email can go. I want to say again, thank you all for everyone's time, and have a great day.